Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Caseware webinar. Today, we are looking at common tagging errors in Accounts Advanced. This is kind of a follow-on from the iXBRL session that we had recently, we had last month, and you can find the recording for that session on our YouTube channel and also on our help site with some accompanying Q&A and some useful links and that kind of thing. We'll signpost that for you a bit later on if you haven't seen that already. But if we jump to the next slide, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Tom Jeffrey, one of the Education and Media Technicians at Caseware UK, joined by Phil Reeves today, one of our Education and Media Consultants. Phil's going to be taking you through the content, and I'll just be keeping an eye on the session, make sure it runs smoothly, that kind of thing, and also keeping an eye on your questions. And we'll answer as many of those as we can. Just a little bit of housekeeping on the next slide. So if you have a question, you can use the Q&A option there as being demonstrated, and we'll do our best to answer it live on the session. If we don't, we'll get back to you afterwards, and we'll also produce a Q&A document that will include all of the questions from the session, and we'll add that to the article on our help site. That's going to accompany the recording. So we are recording the session as we usually do, and you'll find that on the help site and on our YouTube channel. So I'll hand over to Phil now, and we'll get started first of all by looking at the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Let me just move this off the screen. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, let's jump onto the agenda. So yeah, as Tom mentioned, this is a follow-up from or almost like a second part to the iXBRL webinar that we did previously. So if anyone's watching this after on a recording, then please take a moment just to pause the recording and go ahead and find that on our YouTube channel that Tom will signpost at the end of this webinar. Obviously, for those who are watching it now, you can see on the screen, we've got the agenda. Really going to split this into two different elements of today's webinar. So errors that relate to areas that are automatically tagged where we've forgotten to include certain information, potentially within the wizard, or we're missing content in the file itself, or it could be to do with mandatory tags. And then the second part will be in relation to manual tagging. So areas that will require you to manually tag the financial statements, and the errors that could get caught or that could result from us incorrectly manually tagging those errors and what to look out for. The main ones being related parties, controlling parties, those are, and subsidiary undertakings. They are the areas where we get a lot of questions from our support team, hence why we're running this webinar, or into our support team, I should say. So, what type of tagging errors we'll be looking at today? Well, we got one that's less common nowadays, but for those that are not on up to date with their updates, then there is still a risk of a taxonomy conflict. So we'll look at that as a type of error. Then you can also have an issue with missing content, which again we'll focus on today during this webinar. Accounting statuses, so it could be whereby you've not put something somewhere that is required within the accounts. That could be through completion, or it could be through areas of the wizard. And then there are those specific tagging errors that can arise as we go through the file, again, which we'll look at in this webinar. We'll start by going into file one, which really looks at errors that can relate to the wizard completion. So as we mentioned, a lot of these areas are automatically tagged within the file, but ultimately, if we don't put the information into the right areas of the wizard or the right areas of the file, then that can cause issues. So although it is, as I say, automatically tagged by Caseware, it does still require you to complete some areas of the file. So we'll look at that first, and then obviously we'll go into our second file to look at some of those manual tagging errors. You can see some examples of some of the things we'll look at: missing dates, mandatory tags, and the account status. And as you can see, these are some of the errors that could occur on the screen, but we'll look at those in a file example now. So I will jump into a Caseware file, which, again, save everyone looking at PowerPoint presentations for this entire webinar. And as you can see, we are in tagged limited. So again, we're looking at some of the common tagging errors. So we're not looking at anything that is, very difficult to get in the file. We're not looking at specific examples from specific instances that we've seen in the past. These are ones that come up quite often within our support team, where in this case people have forgotten to put information into the right places of the wizard or within the financial statements themselves. Okay, so we have got just a couple of instances to look at in this file, as I say, in relation to the wizard. But firstly, I want to look at some examples of where you can receive those error messages if we go into generate iXBRL. So again, if you're not aware of the generation process for iXBRL, please take a moment to look at the iXBRL webinar that my colleague Tom did. And if I click on generate iXBRL, so when we're tagging files and when we're creating these instance documents to submit to Companies House for HMRC, a variety of diagnostics take place during that process. And the first diagnostics really takes place simply by us deciding what export type we want to use. So Companies House is only available for those that have the Companies House submissions option as part of their license. Everyone else will only ever see the HMRC option. But it is important, if we are submitting with Companies House, really this is where the first diagnostics takes place. And as you can see on the screen, these are some of the common tagging or common errors, I should say, that we get when we're exporting to Companies House. I'll give you the opportunity to read those on the screen. I won't read through them. But really, we're looking at, and again, these errors are being caused by firstly, in two of the cases, us not completing the completion section of the wizard, and that middle error message is in relation to the company number, which we'll come back to in a moment. So these are critical warnings, which mean we can't progress beyond this point. So if I was trying to submit this set of financial statements to Companies House, I wouldn't be able to go any further than this point. If I go back and go HMRC, you can see I am able to, this is a diagnostic warning to say we haven't completed the completion section. I could tick this box, but again, the chances are there will be error messages if I do try to progress when we get through to one of the later diagnostics that takes place in the file. And ultimately, I won't get a completed iXBRL or instance document generated from this process. So going back, if we're looking at the Companies House example, the first and the last message is referring directly to the completion section. And that is something that we do need to make sure that we have completed before we try and generate these iXBRL instance documents. Now, you can tag the file without completing the completion section, but there are areas in the file that are driven directly from the completion, things like dates and who's signing the financial statements. So when I go to Wizard and I go to completion, that should open up on the completion section already, almost like I've already opened this ahead of the webinar. And as you can see here, accounts options, we can go through and we can say, right, final accounts, we need to make sure we've selected final accounts, which will then give us the option to include our printed signature names and our printed dates, which we can do by expanding these sections here. Again, I've already gone through and selected who's going to be signing the relevant documents, but we need to make sure we have applied these options here and then also included our relevant dates for signing these financial statements in the box here, which just for the sake of argument, we're going to select as today. Obviously, for those companies that are submitting their financial statements to Companies House, again, for a small company, you may be inclined to select the small company filing copy, at which point you do also need to make sure you put your dates in the small company filing option here, again, to avoid any error messages appearing a little bit later on. But go back to financial statements and we go back to generate iXBRL, we should see we only get one error message now when we select Companies House, as opposed to the two that we saw previously. Now there's two. One is to do with regulatory bodies, which I've also forgotten to apply. If I go back to the wizard, then that is the last option where we can say we're filing with regulatory bodies, which again is only relevant if we are filing with to Companies House. Now, for the sake of this and to get error messages, again, we want to look at common tagging, common errors. So I'm just going to turn those options off. We're going to run through the HMRC because we can see where that error will appear elsewhere. So obviously at Companies House level, we can't get any further than that without applying those dates and selecting regulatory bodies. But if we were doing HMRC, we could just tick this box and continue from here. But again, Caseware will flag that we haven't completed the completion section a little bit later on in this process. So we get to this screen, we select our export location, which I will just select as here. There we go, desktop sign. Just call it iXBRL, and then we'll go to export. Now, the second diagnostics that we get when we're generating a file takes place at this stage. So this is checking all of the context and all the options, numerics. If you're unsure of context and numerics, again, take some time to look at our previous iXBRL webinar. And as you can see here, all of these error messages are exactly the same. And this is, again, a common error that we get when we're from a support perspective, and we get calls about. And this is where an instance where the context does not specify a valid entity. Now, when we're tagging the caseware files, caseware uses a scheme and an identifier for every single tag that it applies throughout the file. And that scheme is essentially, the identifier element of it is essentially picking up the company registration number. Now, as you can see just behind this window and on the cover page, we haven't put in a company registration number, which obviously can in turn lead to error messages. So we're not able to identify what the entity is. So we need to go back into our wizard document. And again, an error that we do often see is where people haven't gone through or have forgotten almost in the general information, in the start section, to put our registration number into that cell provided. So just by putting that registration number, again, we can eliminate the risk of errors appearing as we go through the file. At this stage, when I generate the iXBRL again, it will go through now the process of, if I just click iXBRL again, and we generate that iXBRL instance, we will no longer get that secondary XBRL diagnostics error appearing because we've gone through and applied that register number. Again, we've had calls on that in the past in support, and it is something that obviously when you see all those error messages appearing to do with context, you can go, oh, well, I've done something majorly wrong here with regards to my tagging. And that's not the case. It is literally just because we haven't put the registration number into the file. Now, at this stage, we're going to verify the iXBRL, and I'll just pass over to Tom for any questions.
Thanks, Phil. I was sorry, you noticed me gesturing across the desk at you. So we've had a question just while we wait for that to generate. On a detailed profit and loss, is it possible to create a separate iXBRL file for it? So, or is the option for it to be included in one overall file?
It's a good question, because when we submit to Companies House, the DPL isn't required. As you can see on this example, the DPL is turned on. The taxonomy now, previously, unfortunately, I can't click on this drop down, but previously with older versions of the taxonomy, you would have had a 2021 and a with DPL and a 2021 without DPL taxonomy. What we've done in these recent taxonomy updates, we've actually combined them. So when you select to file with Companies House, Caseware will automatically remove the DPL tags as they're not relevant for a Companies House submission. So you shouldn't need two separate files. If you've got the DPL turned on and you file or you select the HMRC option, then Caseware will automatically include the tags of the DPL. If you go through and select the Companies House option, or if you go into the wizard and select file with regulatory bodies, that will also turn off the DPL, because again, when you're filing regulatory bodies to Companies House, the DPL is not required. So it's really about the options. If you don't need the DPL at all, then obviously you can just go to the accounts prep table and turn that off. Hope that answers your question, Tom.
Thanks, Phil. If you'd like any more detail on that, please let us know in the Q&A or in the survey after the session, and we'll get back to you via email afterwards. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. We'll just wait for this to finish tagging the iXBRL. So, verifying. Luckily for everyone in this call, this is, or in this webinar, this is the only time we're going to be verifying any iXBRLs, which I know can sometimes be slightly time consuming, depending on your system, what you've got open. Ours is slowed down slightly by the fact that we're also running, obviously, the Zoom webinar, which takes up, obviously, some processing power on the system. Hopefully that will be finished in the next couple of seconds. As I say, it's the only time we're going to be doing it during this webinar.
I can ask you part of another question that's come in, because it's a multi-part question, just while we wait for this to finish. First question is, why Working Papers 2023 has the option for 2021 as well as 2023 taxonomy?
That's a very good question. So Working Papers 2023 is just a version of Working Papers that's available. In terms of taxonomies, Caseware will always include the last two taxonomies, so the most recent one and the one that was available before. So there wasn't a 2022 taxonomy. So the one previously before that was the 2021 taxonomy that was provided by the FRC. And yeah, we give people both options. They are both accepted by Companies House and HMRC, so you can choose to tag with either. Obviously, our recommendation is that you tag with the most up-to-date taxonomy that is available on the file.
Thanks, Phil. And just to respond very quickly to follow up to that, which is why there's only the option for 2021. So the taxonomies available in that dropdown won't be linked to your version of Working Papers, but will actually be introduced as part of EPAC updates. So if you're not seeing those additional taxonomies, then it's likely that you're not up to date on your EPACs, but we can follow up with some more guidance on that after the session.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. The only other thing quickly on that with regards to the taxonomies, just to quickly point out, that is if you have tagged custom content on the 2021 taxonomy and then you switch to 2023 taxonomy, you will need to retag that content with the 2023 taxonomy. It won't obviously automatically switch to tags on any custom content you created because they are manual tags that you're applying. So those manual tags would still, in theory, be in the 2021 taxonomy. But that could be linked to something else later on. Okay, so our error messages that we have seen on the screen that I showed you previously have all come to fruition in this instance. We got date authorization financial statements for issue, directors signing financial statements, and then a couple to do with dates. Now, again, as you can notice, the authorization of financial statements, the date signing, these are all in relation to the directors who's signing and what date they signed. So these first four error messages will appear at this stage if we haven't completed that wizard completion section. So they are all in relation to, as you can see, to signing dates and directors signing, directors report is all linked to who and when that document was signed, or that statement was signed, or that report was signed, which we tell Caseware within the wizard and the completion section. So if you don't complete the completion section, you're running a HMRC or generating an instance document for HMRC, and you tick past the option where it says you haven't completed the completion section, it will flag it at this stage, which you really want to avoid, because the only way you can go through and continue with this and actually get a document out at the end of it is to make sure that those or that we have no errors at this stage. We can't go through and correct these and then come back to this screen. We have to close this, correct the errors, and then rerun the generation process, which, as you can imagine, would be slightly annoying. The average number of employees during period is an interesting one, which I left in there for the sake of just showing you some of the options. This error message is in relation to, if I close this screen, is in relation to some of the mandatory tags that Caseware provides at the bottom of every single set of financial statements. So for the purpose of those other errors, I can go to the wizard and I can go to completion and I can fix that by, as we saw earlier, putting the dates in here and applying the signatories. But that average number of employees error is in relation to these mandatory tags. Now, Caseware, previously, you'd have had to untick this manually. Caseware does it for you when you generate the iXBRL. But if in this case, we haven't got any average number of employees in this file, then when we generate the iXBRL, the only way to remove that error message would be, as you can see, it unticks that box when I click generate iXBRL. But the only way to avoid that error is when we go through this process is to tick the box to export numeric items as zero balances. Otherwise, what you'll find is that Caseware will keep flagging up that error to say you haven't got any average number of employees, because by default, when you're generating these instance documents, Caseware does not tag zero value, or does not include, I should say, in the export any zero value tags, because for obvious reasons, if there's no reason to include them, then it's not going to include them. But from the average number of employees perspective, because it is a mandatory tag, if they are zero, you do need to tick this box. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Okay. What we'll do at this stage is, so they are some of the automatic tagging errors that we can receive, again, in relation to not completing the completion section, not putting the registered number in, or in the case of, average number of employees, needing to select that export button as we go through. At this stage, we're going to look at, if I jump back to our PowerPoint, we're going to look at some of the manual tagging errors that can occur. And these are some of the examples that we can get as we go through the file. So we got, again, I won't read them out, but they're all in relation to either an incorrect context being used on a manual tag or an incorrect numeric item being used on a manual tag. Or it could be where we haven't put information into an area that is required, or we have put information into an area that isn't required. So these are all examples of some of the manual tagging errors that you can get, and we'll talk through these as we go through. Now, to do that, I'm now going to go into here's one I made earlier instance. And for this example, we're going to use related parties and controlling parties, because really these are two of the main areas that will always require manual tagging within caseware. Caseware cannot automatically tag related party and controlling parties because, every company has a different controlling parties, statement, layout, their company structure is different. Therefore, we give you a text area to populate those sections as required. And again, we're looking at this from an FRS 102 perspective, the most common template used within caseware. Now, if I generate the iXBRL in this instance, you can see I've already gone through and completed the wizard document. The giveaway for that is this padlock icon. But we click Company's House, you can see I've passed this diagnostics. If you click HMRC, I've passed this diagnostics. We will continue. I'll just override the existing iXBRL that we've got and untick that to include review functionality. Just a quick one on that one. If you are reviewing the file, then feel free to tick that. It gives you an overview of all the tags you've used. But if you're filing electronically, that has to be unticked. Now, at this stage, we are going to click on our cloud icon and we are going to receive our different error messages, and we're going to talk through them and what they mean and what you can expect. And again, these are all very common when it comes to people using caseware. And it's not necessarily that ultimately is because we've selected the wrong numeric or the wrong context. But, when we're tagging, in this case, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, we're talking about 10, potentially 10 tags on that related party transactions note. It's easy to make a mistake as we go through. But the good thing is, we don't go all the way through the export process before caseware will flag those. It will flag those during this secondary diagnostics window. So the error that we've got is the first one. A unit of measure was not specified for monetary tag payment to related parties. So this is quite a common one. When we're tagging numeric items within the caseware file, we need to assign a numeric value to that. So, or a numeric instance to it, I should say. So when I go to correct here, we're referring to this, and again, caseware will flag in the file with a red icon what tag it's referring to. So for anything that is a value in the file when we're manually tagging it, and caseware does this obviously with the automatic tagging, it will apply, as you would have seen hopefully within the first webinar if you watched that one, is a context. It'll have obviously a tag applied to it, but also a numeric item. So from a text perspective, we're tagging text within a file. We would always use no unit of measure. But if we're tagging anything numeric, we need to make sure, so that could be a percentage, a share value. It could be, in this case, just a value within a file. We need to apply an appropriate numeric. So this is where, if we haven't, and I'll just move this to the side of it so we can see that error. If we get this error to say unit of measure was not specified for a monetary tag, it means that the tag is expecting a monetary value, but we haven't applied a correct numeric. So we need to click on this drop down, and we need to clear by selecting, in this case, reporting currency, but it could be percentage, it could be number. If it's a value that is in relation to an amount, then we would usually select reporting currency. It may also be reporting currency flipped to value in the event that the value is negative and we flipped it. But in this case, this is just written in a text format. Therefore, we would select reporting currency. And by doing that, that will remove that error message. Now, I'm going to quickly skip ahead past some of these because we've got the alternative to that, which is these. And these are warning icons. Now, the red messages that we got here are stopping us from exporting. But the warning icons, we could, in theory, progress without clearing those, because Caseware will automatically strip out the numeric item. So in this instance, we've got a tagged information which is non-numeric. However, we have applied a unit of measure. So it's the complete opposite to what we just had. If I go to correct, wait for that to load. In this instance, we're tagging, as you can see, some wording for simply software limited. And this should have a numeric item of no unit of measure, which obviously, as I'm sure you can imagine, if we apply that, this isn't a reporting currency. It's not a value. Therefore, it would always use any text. If you're tagging something and it's text related, always use no unit of measure to avoid that error. As I say, Caseware will automatically strip out, as it says in this extended information section down here, the unit of measure will be automatically stripped out during the export. So if you don't fix it and you go for an export, Caseware will just remove that for you anyway. If I did it down here as well, this is another example. I just select no unit of measure and then click OK to that. Now back to our major diagnostic error messages. We've got one here, the red warning. Item represents information over a period, is using a context associated with a specific date. Now, if I go to correct for this, and again, this is an even more common message that we would receive, and again, question we would receive from our support standpoint. Now, in this instance, item representing information over a period is using a context associated with a specific date is essentially referring to one of two instances that can occur within a file. So when we're talking about information that is in relation to essentially the income statement, that is referring to the entire period. If we are referring to an item that is in relation to the balance sheet, we are obviously specifically referring to the end of that period. The balance sheet is as at a certain date, and obviously the income statement is for the period or for the year, or it depends on what wording we use. And that is also relevant when it comes to the tagging. So if I went up to any tag that is in relation to the balance sheet, so the debtor's note or the balance sheet itself or a creditor's note, fixed asset notes, they will always use a specific tag type, which is in relation to, a specific context, which relates to a period end. So if I go to this one, for example, this is prior period end date. If I went to an income statement table, that would use a tag that related to solely the entire prior period. So income statement, prior period, balance sheet information, or anything that relates to a specific date in time, we would use, in most cases, the end date tag. Now, the error message will occur when we've used the wrong context. So if you look at this example here, the item representing information over a period is using a context associated with a specific date. So this item here is referring to purchases that took place throughout 2023. So we're referring to an entire period. But the context we've used, and Caseware knows that by the tag that we've used payments to related parties. So these are payments that it's not just one day, it's payments that have taken place over the period. So what we're expecting here in the context is for the context to obviously represent that, to show that we're referring to the whole period. And the context we've used in this instance is referring specifically to the end date. So I need to click on this. And if I get that error, I need to change the context to refer to the entire period, which would be by selecting simply the prior period context as opposed to the one that ends with prior period end date. So by switching that to the prior period, we can click OK, and that will remove the error message. Now we're down to 2. Now, again, similar to what we had before when we were talking about, the numeric being incorrect, we have the complete opposite can also occur with these error message referring to end date or not end date on the end of the context. So this next error is referring to item representing information at a specific date is using a context associated with the duration. So if we flip reverse what we just mentioned, so we had payments to related parties referring to the entire period. In this instance, we have an amount that was owed or was outstanding at the end of the year. So at the end date, the cutoff date for the period, we owed X amount. In this case, at the end of the prior year, we owed 10,000 to the related party. So for this one, we've used the tag balance owed to the related party. And because that's amount that we are currently owing at the end of the period, we owe that amount. That would then obviously transfer on to next year. And therefore, the context for those sorts of items would be have the end date element on there. So it'd be prior period end date. So again, if we're referring to a specific date in time, we need to make sure we use the prior period end date context. If we're referring to a entire period, then we would simply use prior period. Think of it again, if it's something that would be in most cases balance sheets like, then we would use end date, and if it's income statement, then we would use prior period. We click OK to that, and that removes that error message. Now, the final error that we've got is tagged items value does not meet the length requirement specified for this taxonomy element. So throughout the taxonomies that we provide or that we've built into Caseware, some tag elements require text in there to be able to correctly populate information. That's why we get those error messages that we saw earlier. So those ones to do with dates and the signing of the director's report and the balance sheet, they were because there's a tag there that's been applied, but there's no information in that tag. So it flags up with a warning message. Now, in the opposite of that, if we have information where a tag is, but it's not expecting any wording in that tag, we will get this error message here. So it's not meeting the length requirements that are specified. Now, the issue with this is that if I go to correct, and again, this is common when we're tagging controlling party notes. When we tag controlling party notes, and we're talking about in this case, the United Kingdom is the country of incorporation for the parent undertaking of the smallest group, we are tagging that as United Kingdom. But the way we do that is that we have to go through and create a dimensional context. So just as a quick overview, again, I won't go through this in too much detail, but right click and we go new dimensional context, and we provide details in that dimensional context of the country within this drop down here. So we find the United Kingdom and we create that tag. If you want some more information on that, please feel free to ask. And we've got some videos on our help site with information about what needs to be tagged in there. So the context we use for this is the country of incorporation UK. And the context we've included, we've already told the context that the country of incorporation is the United Kingdom. So when you're tagging the controlling party note, you don't need to put the word United Kingdom in to the cell, because the cell has basically got the information that it needs already within it. So similar to what we have down here, you can see this is the example of what we want to be including. We want to be saying United Kingdom just simply in the text and have a blank cell next to it that we can tag accordingly and then use the context that Caseware is already or that we've created using the new dimensional context. Now, the issue with this error message is that we can't correct that in this screen. We can't correct it here because there's nothing wrong with the context that we've used. There's nothing wrong with the numeric, the right tag's been used. The issue is we've simply got information in a cell that doesn't need to be there. So the only way we can resolve this is to cancel, click OK, then go through and fix it in the financial statements themselves. So although the file has been locked because we've gone through and marked the completion, it's not locked from user editing. So we can write United Kingdom in here. And then we would remove the words United Kingdom from our cell. So the tag is still applied to that cell, but the word United Kingdom is now outside of that cell in the same way that we have done here. To avoid that error appearing, our recommendation really is that when you create these cells, and again, if you want more information on creating cells, let us know, we can send that across to you. But create the cell, and as you can see with this one, this is not an input cell, so we can't put anything in there. So when you create that cell, just make it a non-input cell, and then obviously there'll be no risk of anyone accidentally typing in United Kingdom when they don't need to. Now when I generate the iXBRL again, and click HMRC and I go through and we will use this existing one. And I press the cloud button. That should go straight through and start to export the iXBRL because I've cleared the error messages that we've got. Now, I did say that we wouldn't have to see this again, but unfortunately, I've gone and clicked it, so we are going to have to see this again, Tom. So I'll pass back to you for any quick questions that we've got.
Okay, so I'm sort of cherry picking a bit here. We have got quite a few questions, so thanks very much for those. And don't worry if we don't answer during the session, we'll definitely be answering afterwards. But do we also use display only for that cell that we're creating? Which is a very good question.
That is a good question. In theory, you don't need to, but it's recommended from a visual perspective. From the perspective of tagging, it doesn't need to be display only, but from the perspective of actually printing the accounts, if you have that cell there, you might get a slight gap in the between, or slightly larger gap between, in this case, in the and in the United Kingdom. So yeah, from a visual perspective, when you create that cell, click display only, but from a tagging perspective, there is no need to just have display only. It won't affect the tagging at all.
Thanks, Phil. We did go through that process in the previous iXBRL webinar, but we also have some bite-sized content that we can add to the Q&A and useful links that we'll be adding alongside the recording of the webinar. We've got quite a specific question, but I think it's sort of fits in with the controlling party segment that we were just looking at, which is we are using Working Papers 23 with the 2023 taxonomy. However, when we tag all the controlling parties required tags and apply the controlling party active period context, we get the error when submitting to HMRC. And upon opening the dimensions, the detail for the taxonomy is 2019. Why doesn't this update automatically, and what's the easiest way to correct this? So it just sounds like there's an older taxonomy loaded in. You just need to change which taxonomy you're using.
Yeah, I was going to say it could be that the taxonomy that's been, if we have an automatic, or like I said previously with custom content, if you switch to taxonomy, you then need to reapply the manual tags to the area that you're tagging using the new taxonomy within the file. So if I've tagged this previously using the 2021 or maybe even further back than that, say 2019 taxonomy, and I've then gone up to 2023, I'm not even, because again, when 2021 was taxonomy, it would have been 2021 and 2019 that were available in the file, so it would have been fine. But then when we go to, they basically only ever accept the last two. So when we go up to 2023, it accepts 2023 and 2021. But if we've still got custom content that's using the 2019 taxonomy, then obviously we'll get error messages because we're looking at the last two taxonomies. Also, you'll get errors if you've got almost like a mix and match of taxonomies in the file. So if you've got automatic tagging that's using 2023 and you've got manual tagging that's using 2021, that's going to cause issues in the file as well. So just when you switch that taxonomy, please make sure that you reapply any manual tags. It'll be the same tags. The tags haven't changed. It's just a case of updating those to the new taxonomy. Switch taxonomies, apply the tags. It will give you a message, say, do you want to retain the existing tags? Always just say no to that and then reapply the manual tags as you go through.
Thanks, Phil. So we have got other questions, but as I say, we'll see if we can answer those later, if not afterwards. And it looks like we're just about ready to have a look at your favorite tag.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Tom. As you can see, we've not received any other error messages. The last one I wanted to highlight was also on that slide, but it's to do with name or description of related party if not defined by another tag. And in this case, entity controlled by key management personnel 3, it could be 2, it could be 1. And this is an example, again, where just by us potentially selecting the wrong context or the wrong taxonomy, the wrong tag as we've gone through and applied generate the iXBRL. This is, again, a common error that can occur. Now, if I close it, unfortunately, with this error message, like the one that we saw previously where we saw about dates and things like that, we can't resolve these without going back into the file. So I need to go to close. And again, this is a common error that can occur when we're looking at related parties. Now, the type of related party can differ. It could be a subsidiary, it could be an entity controlled by key management personnel. But if I go into tools and I go to to show you that again, iXBRL and tags, this is how we tag, obviously, the custom note, as you would have seen in the previous webinar that we did. But what we are expecting when we're looking at these items is we tag the information. So those purchases that have taken place, we tag those incomes that take place, we tag the payments that have taken place, the balances that we owe and that are owed to us, and then also the name of the related party. And in a full, we tag the entire description. So if I click on this cell here, you can see we're using entity controlled by key management personnel 1. Similarly with this tag, similarly with the name, and then similarly with this one. We're using throughout that entire element. And I click on the paragraph, you can see with the description, we're using the same context in terms of not the actual end of that context, obviously, as we've just mentioned, but the initial part is referring to the same key management personnel each time. Now, an error can occur as we go through that final diagnostic stage if we have accidentally selected the wrong context, the wrong entity controlled by key management personnel. So if I go to this example here, it's obviously our second paragraph, entity controlled by key management personnel 2. This is also number 2. The name is number 2. Absolutely fine so far. Click on this one, entity controlled by key management personnel 2. When we get to this tag, we've accidentally used number 3, which again can occur when we're going through and looking at these tags. Now, the errors occurring when we generate the iXBRL, not because we've used, well, it is essentially because we've used the wrong context, but it's not saying this is wrong. Caseware doesn't know whether this is the wrong context. What it's saying is that for every context that we've used, for every one of those different entity controlled by key management personnels that we've used, we need to name what that entity or who that entity is. So in this case, we've got Total IT Limited, which is number 1, Simply Software, which is number 2. Caseware doesn't know at this stage what number 3 is because we haven't tagged anything as number 3. So in this case, we either need to tag or create a new cell to tag the entity controlled by key management personnel 3, the name or description of that, or we need to switch this tag to be what it should be, which in this case would be entity controlled by key management personnel 2. So just something to be aware of. For every single one of these tags that we use, description or income, we need to also tag a name. We need to tell the tagging process who that related party is. Otherwise, you'll flag up with error messages. If I just tag everything else and ignore that one, then again, it's going to flag up with an error message. Similarly, if I try and say tag this twice, you can't tag a cell twice. So I've only ever seen it in one instance whereby someone tried to tag the name of the related party with 2 different tags. It doesn't work. Each cell has to have only one, or will only allow you to have one tag assigned to it. So please make sure that you don't try and tag things with 2 different contexts. It doesn't work. So now we've corrected that. We've changed this to number 2, or alternatively, you could have created another cell and tagged that as key management personnel 3 using the name or description. That would have also cleared the error message. If I click OK, if I run the generation again, that will fix that error message. If you want to test it on your files rather than watching me generate again, then you can do. But for now, what I'll do is I'll pass back to Tom for any last questions. That was obviously the manual tagging. I'll pass back to Tom now.
Thanks very much, Phil. Thanks very much for all of your questions as well. We've got an excellent selection of questions, some very good questions, which unfortunately we're not going to be able to answer live, but we will go away and prepare some answers to those, and then we'll make those available in a Q&A.